Ethan Miles didn't care much for drama. That was part of the reason he'd bought the land in the first place. 5 acres of peace and quiet just outside the city limits, nestled behind a stretch of pine trees and connected to the main road by an old gravel path his grandfather had laid down decades ago. He spent his days working on motorcycles in his workshop, tending to his garden, and enjoying the kind of silence city folks pay therapists to imagine. He wasn't interested in property lines or neighborhood gossip. He kept to himself and expected others to do the same. So when the envelope arrived, official, cold, and marked with a red stamp that read, "Second notice," he almost threw it away. Almost. He slid it open with the tip of his pocket knife and scanned the contents. Brow furrowing. Notice of violation. Maple Ridge Homeowners Association. Your property has been found in violation of the community standards outlined in Section 4.1 of the Maple Ridge Covenant. Violation. Unauthorized metal structure visible from the street. Fine amount $1,000. Failure to comply within 15 days will result in compounded penalties and possible lien proceedings. Ethan blinked. What the hell is a Maple Ridge Covenant? He looked again at the return address. Sure enough, Maple Ridge HOA, with some generic P.O. box number in town. He turned the letter over, half expecting to find April Fools scrolled across the back. Nothing. Later that evening, he walked the edge of his property, where a narrow, freshly paved road now led to a row of modern 2-story houses, white fences, trimmed lawns, matching mailboxes. That was the new neighborhood that had gone up behind him, the one he'd watched rise over the past 2 years. Dozens of identical homes, springing up like mushrooms after rain. He remembered the developers who'd come around years ago, asking if he wanted to sell. He declined. They built anyway, on what used to be an old cattle pasture that wasn't part of his land. He hadn't paid much attention since. Until now. 2 weeks later, another envelope arrived. Then another. The violations had multiplied. Improper waste disposal. His compost bin. Unsafe fencing. His garden gate. And visible disrepair of his shed. A perfectly functional 12x12 aluminum building he'd built himself. The fines now totaled $11,000. Ethan chuckled at the absurdity until he read the last line. This is your final warning before lien proceedings are filed with the county assessor's office. That night, Ethan stayed up late, digging through his filing cabinet. He pulled out the original deed to his property, complete with surveys and easements, some of which dated back nearly 40 years. He wasn't in Maple Ridge. His land predated the development. He'd never signed any covenant, never agreed to any homeowner association rules. So what gave them the right to come after him? The next morning, coffee in hand, Ethan stood at the edge of the paved road and stared down its perfectly smooth surface. He followed it with his eyes as it curved gently through the trees and disappeared into the heart of the Maple Ridge subdivision. He squinted. That road. He walked back to the house, retrieved a worn surveyor map from a dusty drawer, and laid it out across his kitchen table. A long red line ran down the middle of the page. It matched the exact path of the road the HOA used daily, and it was marked Private Easement, Miles Family Trust. Ethan smiled. Not a grin, not a smirk. Just the subtle, quiet curve of a man who had just realized something very important. They built their kingdom on a road he still owned. Ethan couldn't remember the last time he smiled like that. Not out of joy, but out of quiet disbelief. As he traced the red line across the faded survey map, the realization sank deeper. The HOA had no clue. Or worse, they did, and they were betting he didn't. He poured himself another cup of coffee and sat back down. This wasn't just a technicality. The paved road leading into Maple Ridge Estates, the one their entire community depended on, used to be a gravel lane his grandfather had carved out with a tractor and stubborn resolve. Years ago, the county had approached his family with a deal, allow public access through the land for emergency vehicles and development planning. It was formalized as a temporary easement, not a permanent right-of-way, a handshake and a contract. After his grandfather passed, the road fell back into Ethan's name through the family trust, and the easement quietly expired when the county dropped maintenance due to budget cuts. No one had bothered to renew it, especially not the developers. He turned to his computer and began pulling property records. With every click, the picture became clearer and more absurd. The entire Maple Ridge community had been built with assumed access. Based on the outdated easement, the developers had likely paved over the old road without confirming ownership. The HOA had inherited that mistake. They were essentially landlocked, and they didn't know it. A week later, a third letter arrived. Total fines due $50,300. Failure to respond will result in lien placement on property located at 1720 Ironwood Lane, effective within 30 days. Ethan couldn't decide if it was bold or stupid. Probably both. The arrogance in their tone lit something in him he hadn't felt in a while. Maybe anger, maybe something more primal. He had let them build their houses, let them trim their bushes, and look down their noses at his garden. And now they wanted to fine him for existing. Fine. He'd give them something worth writing a letter about. The next morning, he drove down to the county recorder's office with a copy of the deed, the expired easement, and a simple request: re-verify his legal ownership of the access road and file a notice of private access status. The clerk gave him a slow, knowing look when she read the documents. "You're sure you want to file this? This'll stir up some drama." Ethan nodded. Let it stir. 2 days later, he delivered copies of the recorded notice directly to the HOA's P.O. box, certified mail. No response. Not until a black SUV rolled up his driveway. Unannounced the following week, 3 people stepped out, 2 men in suits, and a sharply dressed woman holding a leather folder. She extended a manicured hand. "Angela Rusk, president of the Maple Ridge HOA. We'd like to talk." Ethan didn't shake it. He motioned toward the porch chairs instead. Angela didn't sit. "We received your notice about the road. We believe there's been a misunderstanding. That easement is part of the Maple Ridge infrastructure plan. It's assumed public access." Ethan raised an eyebrow. "Assumed? That's not how land ownership works." One of the men chimed in. "Look, we don't want trouble, but this back and forth about fines and access rights, it's not good for either of us. Maybe we can come to a compromise." Ethan leaned back. Calm, steady. "You fined me over $50,000 for rules I never agreed to. You threatened my property, and now you want compromise?" Angela's smile thinned. "If you pursue this, we'll take legal action." Ethan stood. "So will I. But I don't think your homeowners will enjoy what happens when they wake up one day and the only road to their homes is locked behind a gate." He paused. "Let the silence settle. See yourself out." They left. But Ethan could already feel the storm gathering, and he wasn't moving an inch. The day of the HOA board meeting arrived faster than Ethan expected. He wasn't invited, but that didn't matter. He had a quiet confidence now, the kind that comes from knowing the cards are stacked in your favor. Maple Ridge's community center buzzed with low murmurs as homeowners gathered, dressed in their Sunday best and brand new anxieties. Ethan slipped in through the back entrance, unnoticed at first, but the moment he appeared, the room shifted. Angela Rusk, the HOA president, perched at the head of the table, her perfectly manicured nails tapping impatiently. "Mr. Miles," she said, voice sharp but controlled. "We were not expecting you." Ethan smiled, just a little. "I'm here to clear the air." She narrowed her eyes. "This isn't your community, Ethan. The fines are valid, as are the covenants you violated." He pulled out the thick folder of legal documents he'd painstakingly gathered. The property deeds, county records, the notice of private, access he'd filed. "This is my land. The only road you use to come and go belongs to me. You don't have jurisdiction to fine me. You don't even have a right of way." Angela leaned forward, her voice dropping. "If that road is private, then we have a serious problem." "So do you," Ethan replied evenly. "Because without access, your entire neighborhood is landlocked. No emergency vehicles, no deliveries, no school buses." The room murmured. Some homeowners exchanged worried glances. Angela quickly regained her composure. "We can negotiate a right of way, but the fines stand." Ethan shook his head. "No, I'm not paying your fines, and I'm not signing over access without terms." A sharp voice interrupted from the back. "Why don't we just open the road and get on with it?" It was a young man, nervously shifting his weight. Ethan recognized him, Marcus, a new resident who'd been vocal about reforming the HOA's heavy-handed tactics. Angela shot him a warning glance, but Marcus pressed on. "This is madness. Threatening the guy who literally controls the only way in. We're the ones stuck." Angela cut him off. "That's enough," but the damage was done. The room was divided between those loyal to the HOA leadership and those quietly rooting for Ethan. After the meeting, Ethan walked outside into the crisp evening air. A group of homeowners lingered nearby, whispering. One woman approached him, cautiously. "I'm sorry for what they're doing to you," she said. "But this is all so complicated. What happens if they really block us in?" Ethan looked her in the eye. "Then they'll learn a hard lesson about control. I'm not the bad guy here. They chose to build without securing the road properly. Now they have to deal with it." That night, Ethan stood on his porch, staring down the long gravel path that twisted through the trees. He'd thought this would be a simple dispute. He'd been wrong, because Maple Ridge wasn't just any neighborhood. It was a fortress built on borrowed ground, and he held the key. And soon, they'd all find out what that meant. The dawn fog hung thick and heavy as Ethan watched from the porch of his old farmhouse. The early morning silence was shattered by the distant rumble of heavy machinery, metal clanking, engines roaring, a sound out of place in his quiet world. Ethan had called in a favor from a few trusted contractors, men who owed him for odd jobs over the years. They arrived before sunrise with trucks, cranes, and a large steel gate in tow. The plan was simple and deliberate. Control the only entrance to Maple Ridge Estates, once and for all. By the time the sun broke through the mist, a tall iron gate stood imposingly across the gravel road, blocking access. Its black bars gleamed coldly, topped with sharp spearheads that caught the light. Bold, official-looking signs were posted on either side. Private property. Access by written permission. Only trespassers will be prosecuted. Ethan stepped back and lit a cigarette, the morning air crisp in his lungs. He felt a strange mix of satisfaction and anticipation. This wasn't just a gate, it was a message. Soon, the first cars began to arrive. Delivery trucks, mail vans, parents driving kids to school. One by one, they came to a sudden stop. Engines idling, faces tightening as they realized the road was closed. At first, there was confusion. Drivers got out, stared at the gate, and knocked on it, hoping it was some mistake. but no one answered, except Ethan's security cameras. News spread like wildfire. Within hours, the HOA board was in full crisis mode. Angela Rusk was pacing in the community center, red-faced and furious. She ordered emergency calls to the sheriff's department, threatening legal action for trespassing and obstruction. But the sheriff's deputy who arrived was calm and unequivocal. Mr. Miles has a legal right to restrict access to his property, including this road. Until this is settled in court, there's nothing we can do. Back at the gate, Ethan watched the commotion on his phone. Neighbors were gathering, some angry, some pleading, others simply bewildered. Then came the calls, directly to him. "Ethan, please, this is madness. Kids can't get to school. We're trapped," pleaded one woman. "Open the road," another demanded. "You're holding us hostage." Ethan didn't respond right away. Instead, he stood silently, thinking about how they'd ignored his rights for months. Fines, threats, letters piling up like garbage. This was his chance to make them listen. Later that evening, Angela's voice came through on the phone, icy and sharp. "Open the gate now, or we'll sue." Ethan leaned back in his chair. "You threatened me with liens and fines for months. This is me holding up my end of the bargain. Negotiate, or keep driving in circles." Angela's silence on the other end was telling. The following days were a whirlwind. Some residents formed a coalition, demanding access and mediation. Others whispered about lawsuits and emergency injunctions. But Ethan stayed steady. He wasn't looking for a fight. He was looking for respect, and respect he knew had to be earned. The community center felt colder than usual when the HOA board arrived, faces drawn tight with frustration. The emergency meeting wasn't scheduled by choice. It was forced by Ethan's iron gate and the chaos it had unleashed. Angela Rusk stood near the podium, trying to project control, but even she seemed rattled. The residents packed the room, a restless crowd of anxious homeowners, caught between fear and defiance. Then, the door opened, and Ethan walked in. A hush fell over the room. No one expected him to show, let alone on their turf. He carried a single leather portfolio under his arm, the weight of it somehow heavier than the folder suggested. Angela's eyes flashed. "Mr. Miles, you're stirring the pot more than ever." Ethan set the portfolio down, opening it with deliberate calm. "I'm here to talk terms." The room leaned in. "Your HOA fines, $50,000 in total, are baseless. You never had jurisdiction to issue them," Ethan said plainly. "But I'm willing to settle for a fair arrangement." He clicked open a folder, revealing a formal proposal. A monthly road usage fee of $10,000, payable to the Miles Family Trust. Immediate rescinding and nullification of all past fines. A public apology from the HOA to him, and, crucially, no further attempts to assert authority over his property. Angela's jaw tightened. "That's extortion." "No," Ethan replied, voice steady and firm. "It's business. You've used my property without permission. Now you're paying for it." He paused, letting his words sink in. "The alternative is you keep your gates locked and watch your neighborhood's value plummet. No access means no services. No services mean no buyers." Angela's assistant whispered in her ear, and she shot Ethan a warning glance. "This isn't a negotiation. You're holding the entire community hostage." "Am I?" Ethan asked with a slow smile. "Or am I simply making you understand what it means to lose control?" A murmur swept the room. Some residents nodded, quietly. Others looked away. Angela tried a different tactic. "We can offer you a compromise. Perhaps a reduced fee. We don't want this to drag on forever. Ethan shook his head. Not a penny less than the value of what you're using. This road isn't just gravel and dirt. It's my property, and I'm not giving it away. The board members whispered among themselves. Visibly divided, Marcus, the young resident from the previous meeting, stood up. We can't keep going like this. This is our home, but we didn't realize how fragile it was. Angela cut him off. Again. We're trying to fix this. Ethan turned to the room, voice low but clear. You need to decide. Do you respect property rights? Or do you keep trying to bully someone who knows the law better than you? The weight of his words pressed down, and for a moment, no one spoke. Then, Angela rose abruptly. This meeting is adjourned. Ethan gathered his portfolio and walked out, leaving a room full of tension and unanswered questions. Outside, he lit a cigarette and looked back at the community center. This wasn't over. Far from it, because he wasn't just protecting a road. He was protecting a principle, a warning that power without respect can crumble at the first real test. And Ethan Miles was ready for that fight. The days following the negotiation meeting felt like the calm before a storm. Ethan kept a low profile, though the gate still stood firm across the road. News spread fast. Local reporters caught wind of the standoff, and Maple Ridge had become a hot topic in the small town's gossip circuit. Inside the community, opinions split sharply. Some homeowners began questioning the HOA's leadership and their oversight in the road ownership fiasco. Others clung to their frustration at being locked out of their own homes. Ethan watched it all quietly from the sidelines. He hadn't come to ruin lives, only to assert what was rightfully his. But the more the community fractured, the more he realized that dragging them through legal battles would only deepen wounds. One evening, as the sun dipped behind the trees, a surprise visitor arrived, a familiar face from the earlier HOA meetings. Marcus, the young resident who had spoken up in defense of Ethan, stood at the gate, looking uncertain. "Can we talk?" Marcus asked. Ethan nodded, stepping aside to let him through. They sat on the porch, the quiet of the evening settling around them. "I've been thinking," Marcus began. "Maybe there's a way out of this without all the hostility." Ethan raised an eyebrow. "I'm listening." Marcus explained that many residents were willing to acknowledge Ethan's rights, but wanted to find a practical solution that wouldn't trap them indefinitely or spark expensive lawsuits. "What if," Marcus said hesitantly, "we negotiated a formal easement, one that gives you compensation, but also guarantees us access?" Ethan rubbed his chin. "That's what I proposed already." "Yes, but you demanded a hefty fee and an apology that might be impossible for some to swallow." Marcus smiled wryly. "People want fairness, not punishment." The conversation shifted. They discussed terms, the possibility of a gated entry with controlled access, a maintenance fee, shared fairly, and clear legal agreements. For the first time since the conflict began, Ethan felt something new, hope. He agreed to draft a proposal, but on one condition: no more HOA fines or attempts to assert authority over his property. The road was his. The community needed to respect that. Word spread quickly that Marcus and Ethan were talking seriously. It caused ripples within the HOA board, dividing them further. Angela Rusk was furious when she heard. She summoned a special meeting to strategize, insisting that Ethan's proposal was a trap designed to weaken their control. But some board members, exhausted by the conflict, quietly supported opening dialogue. Meanwhile, Ethan prepared his proposal carefully. It wasn't about making money. It was about respect, fairness, and stability. When the document was finally sent to the HOA board, it shocked them with its balance: a reasonable fee structure, shared responsibility for road upkeep, and clear, terms protecting Ethan's ownership. The ball was in their court, but negotiations are never simple. The next move would test whether both sides could truly put pride aside. Ethan stared at the gate that evening, knowing the fight wasn't over. But for the first time, it felt like it might end with a real solution, not just threats and fines. The days stretched long and tense as Ethan waited for the HOA board's response to his new proposal. He kept a careful watch on the gate, the silent sentinel that had changed the fate of the entire neighborhood. Then, the unexpected happened. Instead of a rejection or a legal threat, Ethan received a formal letter from the HOA's attorney. The tone was cautious, but serious. "Dear Mr. Miles, after careful review and consultation, the HOA board has decided to accept your proposal with one condition: an independent survey of the road and surrounding property lines by a neutral third party. This survey will confirm the exact boundaries and easements, ensuring no disputes arise in the future. We suggest scheduling this survey within the next 2 weeks. Sincerely, Maple Ridge HOA Board." Ethan felt a flicker of relief. Perhaps this standoff was finally moving toward resolution. He immediately arranged for the survey and watched as the surveyors arrived, marking boundaries and measuring distances meticulously. But the survey uncovered something no one expected: a buried, faded marker deep in the woods, adjacent to the road. Ethan's heart skipped a beat when the surveyor called him over. "This looks like an old easement marker," the surveyor said, brushing away dirt and leaves. "It predates the subdivision." Ethan's mind raced. Could this mean there was an older, legally binding right-of-way, a path that the developers, and even the HOA, might have overlooked? The next community meeting was packed with anxious residents, eager for updates. Ethan presented the findings, the ancient marker, and the survey report. Angela Rusk's expression darkened. "If this marker is legitimate, it could change everything," she admitted, though reluctantly. But then came the twist that no one saw coming. An elderly man in the back stood up, his voice steady but firm. "My father was the surveyor who placed that marker," he said. "It was part of a negotiated right-of-way, meant to ensure access for neighbors. Not just you, Mr. Miles." The room fell silent. The man revealed a faded contract he had kept for decades, detailing a shared right-of-way agreement that granted access to the road for the community while maintaining certain private ownership rights. Suddenly, the clear lines of property ownership blurred. The gate wasn't just blocking a private road, it was interfering with a long-standing, community-recognized access right. Ethan felt the ground shift beneath him. This wasn't what he'd expected. Angela spoke carefully. "This means the HOA was right to assert access, but your ownership rights are also valid." The revelation forced both sides to reconsider. The next steps would require trust and compromise, something the community had never needed to practice before. Ethan left the meeting deep in thought. The fight had grown bigger than fines and gates. It was about history, trust, and the future of their neighborhood. And the biggest question lingered. Would they be able to move forward together? Or would this twist tear Maple Ridge apart? The community hall was packed to the brim for what felt like the most important meeting in Maple Ridge's history. Every homeowner, lawyer, and curious neighbor filled the room with a tense, expectant energy. Ethan sat at the front, flanked by his lawyer, while Angela and the HOA board sat across, their expressions a mix of cautious optimism and lingering suspicion. The elderly man who'd revealed the old contract stepped up once more. "This agreement," he said, holding the fragile paper carefully, "was meant to balance private property rights with community access. It was drafted decades ago, but somehow got lost in the shuffle. During the subdivision, Angela nodded slowly. The HOA never intended to infringe on Mr. Miles's ownership. We were simply acting to protect residents. Access based on what we believed was the legal easement. Ethan leaned forward. And I never wanted to block anyone indefinitely. I wanted recognition, respect, and fairness. The room was silent as the lawyers worked through the dense legal language. Then came the unexpected discovery. The old contract had a clause allowing the Miles family to revoke the easement if the community failed to maintain the road properly, something the HOA had neglected for years. The revelation shifted the power balance again. It meant Ethan's gate wasn't just a barricade. It was a legal enforcement of a forgotten condition. Angela's voice softened. We acknowledge the oversight, and we are prepared to work with Mr. Miles to restore proper maintenance and formalize the easement. Then came the real surprise. Ethan stood, looking around the room. There's one more thing. He reached into his pocket and pulled out a key. A simple brass key, old and worn. This gate, he said, holding it up, isn't just a barrier. It's a reminder. He explained that his grandfather had placed the gate years ago as a symbol of stewardship. Ownership came with responsibility, but also with community trust. Ethan offered the key to Angela. I'm willing to unlock this gate, but only if we commit to a partnership. Shared responsibility, shared respect. The room erupted in applause. Angela took the key, smiling genuinely for the first time. Let's build that future. Ciao. The weeks that followed, the gate opened regularly, controlled by a keypad, accessible to residents and emergency services. The HOA and Ethan's Family Trust formed a joint committee to manage road maintenance and community safety. The fines were dropped, and an official apology was issued. The once divided community began to heal. Ethan stood by the road one afternoon, watching children ride bikes and neighbors chat across the street. The gate stood quietly behind him, a symbol not of division, but of respect and history. Sometimes, power isn't about control. It's about knowing when to hold firm and when to open the gate. And for Ethan Miles, that balance had finally been found.